moving along. Next question in from David. What do you think of this new study reporting that GMOs are safe? It's been all over the net recently, and I didn't know if you had a chance to look into it. Okay, so he's pointing to a Forbes article called Yes, GMOs Are Safe, another major study confirms. So let's break down this article. First of all, this is not a Forbes article in terms of it was being written and published by Forbes. It was just being published by Forbes, but it's a contributor article by a contributor named GMO Answers. So first, what is this contributed content that Forbes is using? I'll put in a link to pointer.org, which had an article up a few years ago about the Forbes model of contributed content and what it means for journalism. But they point out there that this is something that the innovator of this system calls incentive-based entrepreneurial journalism, where basically there are people who work out a deal with the publisher, in this case Forbes.com, that they will write the content and Forbes will publish it. And I don't know the details. Maybe it's different from site to site. Maybe they share revenue, advertising revenue, or whatever it is. But anyway, this is someone who's kind of writing for Forbes, but it isn't Forbes. So that's interesting in and of itself. But more specifically, who is GMO Answers, who's providing this contributed content to Forbes? From their own bio on Forbes.com, GMO Answers is an initiative committed to responding to consumers' questions about GMOs and how our food is grown. Its goal is to make information about GMOs in food and agriculture easier to access and understand. Experts donate their time to answer questions in the area of expertise for the website, in their area of expertise for the website. Oh, how nice. GMO Answers is funded by the members of the Council for Biotechnology Information, which includes BASF, Bayer, Dow AgroSciences, DuPont, Monsanto Company, and Syngenta. So it's a consortium of the GMO manufacturers are answering your questions about GMO. Oh, don't worry, we've got the answers. So take this article with that grain of salt, but what does the article actually say? Okay, so for those of you who don't know, this article says, an exhaustive new study by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine found, quote, no substantiated evidence of a difference in risks to human health between current commercially available genetically engineered crops and conventionally bred crops, and no conclusive causal evidence of environmental problems tied to genetically modified crops. These results might come as a surprise to some, but the reality is that today's GE products are the most researched and tested agricultural products in history, and this report builds on a large and growing body of evidence that supports the safety of GMOs. Okay, so beyond the fact that this is literally GM biotech company propaganda, literally funded by the GM companies, is this true? Well, we have this article from gmwatch.org, How the National Academy of Sciences Misled the Public Over GMO Food Safety. GMO food safe to eat, say world's leading scientists, ran the headline in the Times in the wake of the publication of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences report on GM crops. In almost all the mainstream media, the story was the same, from Nature World News trumpeting, scientists declare GM food safe, to The Guardian's GM food generally safe for humans. In reality, the part of the report that deals with animal feed studies on GM crops is a subtly treacherous mix. Scattered among some sound statements and useful recommendations are a plethora of strategic omissions, gobsmackingly unscientific assertions, wishful thinking, pulled punches, and outright lies. Below, I consider just a few. The report's most outrageous deception is the obliteration of the many findings of harm or risk in animal feeding studies on GM crops. The report says the research that has been conducted in studies with animals and on chemical composition of GE food reveals no differences that would implicate a higher risk to human health from eating GE foods than from eating their non-GE counterparts. That message was translated by the NAS's press release to as no substantiated evidence of a difference in risks to health between current commercially available genetically engineered crops and conventionally bred crops. That's where the media got the message that GM crops are safe. It wasn't just dumb or lazy reporting. It came straight from the NAS itself. But both statements are at best misleading and at worst lies, as anyone knows who has seen any of the long list of animal feeding studies showing risks and harms from GM crops. Ill effects in GM-fed animals include liver and kidney damage, change in blood biochemistry, and immune responses. All right, this goes on. It's a very lengthy article, but let me jump towards the conclusion where he writes, and the NAS report has worked like a GMO lobbyist's dream, prompting parts of the British media, for instance, to lobby for Europe to unblock GM crop farming on the grounds that the report's eminent authors had blown away claims that GM crops and food cause harm. Perhaps not coincidentally, just 2 days after the publication of the NAS report, Health Canada announced its approval for human consumption of the world's first commercialized GMO food animal, Aqua Bounty's GM salmon. As GM foods have apparently been declared safe, who could possibly object? The NAS report should be treated for what it is, not a scientific analysis, but a political document supporting U.S. economic interests. Now, I'm going to leave it there. As I say, this is a pretty lengthy report, and they go into a lot of explicit detail about the various studies that are talked about in the NAS report and how and why they are wrong precisely. So I do truly recommend that you go and read through that article so that you have a better understanding of this report and where it's coming from. But yes, the long story short, yes, this is a politically motivated document that serves business interests that are, as I've documented in the past, well tied into the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the Food and Drug Administration and other pertinent places in the government which are increasingly populated by this revolving door of biotech officials who come in and work for government and then go out with a golden parachute in Monsanto or, those corporations. So, absolutely, this NAS report is being used for propaganda purposes, and I do suggest you actually look into some of the details of it. Again, links in the show notes. All right, let's move on to the next